Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to give you my review for the 1991 horror classic Silence of the Lambs. Now this film came out at a time when essentially horror films were still considered junk food of sort of like the horror, sort of like the film genre thing. I think horror has always been kind of, labelled as sort of like junk food by a lot of people who are outside of the horror community because people think of it as, Friday the 13th, which is basically a guy running around in a mask killing teenagers, or something along those lines. Whereas Silence of the Lambs sits in a very interesting place in cinema history because this was the first horror film that swept the Oscars. This film won Best Leading Performance for Jodie Foster. This film won Best Supporting Actor for Anthony Hopkins. This film won Best Adapted Screenplay for Ted Tully's screenplay on the matter. It swept the Oscars. It was one of the biggest films of 1991, and it was up against some very stiff competition, including an animated film called Beauty and the Beast. So there's so many things about this film that's very interesting. But what's very interesting about this film, what really makes it such an iconic film, is it deserves a lot of the love that it gets. It deserves being considered an Oscar darling because this film is so well written. It's such a very well written horror story, and this is a horror story. Lots of people who might say now, oh, it's technically not a horror film, it's this. No, this film's a horror film because it explores elements of fear, it explores elements of psychology, it explores all the things that really do make us feel both really excited and very kind of almost eager to tap into the dark world of crime solving and trying to study serial killers and human psychology. But then it also kind of taps into the fear that we have of going too deep, which is very similar to another film that I like called Blue Velvet, where a character likes to play amateur sleuth and then he realises that as he goes deeper and deeper and deeper into this dark world, he unlocks a lot of dark and horrible things about himself that he didn't even realise he had. And the parallels for Blue Velvet don't stop there because I feel like that's something that's very interesting. But the actual film itself is about a young woman by the name of Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, who has been training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, and she's been brought forward by one of her mentors, Jack Crawford, to interview a famous serial killer called Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, and he's played by Anthony Hopkins. And at first, Clarice Starling is very hesitant to do this, but then very quickly she begins to catch on to the idea and realise that, oh yes, this could be, good training work for me. But as the film starts off, she begins very, she goes into the FBI offices and she's very, she's sweating and she's having to deal with, the fact that she's just come off of a run. But then there's all these looks that all these men give her. There's that really wonderful moment in the lift. Well, not necessarily a wonderful moment, but I actually kind of find it really interesting because in the lift, she's like, she's sitting in there in the lift with these guys, and they're like really big, beefy guys, like really big, usher type people, big, bouncer type people who, would stand outside nightclubs with their arms folded, and they're like all looking at her. It's kind of like very interesting because there is a very interesting commentary on sexism in this film where it does try to, and it does it in a very kind of subtle way where you're not really thinking about it in terms of political correctness. You're thinking about it in terms of, that's a very interesting little aside that this film decides to tap into, but I'll get into that in a minute. So she gets hired by Jack Crawford, and what I really like about this film, what it does in terms of an adaptation level, is it takes pages and pages worth of dialogue or description and basically turns it into a single shot where, these characters are just looking at her, and they're looking at her with these very kind of, some of them have these very hypnotic eyes. Some of them are looking at her literally just as objects, like those bodybuilders in the lift that she goes into. And then there are some people who are literally looking at her with fascination, like Hannibal Lecter and Buffalo Bill at the end of the film, where they're just looking at it with fascination and things like that. Like they really are fascinated by, Clarice Starling. But what's very interesting is that Clarice Starling isn't interested in men. She isn't interested. There's a lot of men who give her this sort of very seductive look. But what's very interesting is she isn't interested. She does not care about being swept off her feet. She doesn't care about romance. She cares about the job and doing her job well. And that's something that's very interesting, and it's not in your face either. It's very subtle. It's very kind of, it's very much something that just is very casually slipped in there for people who are eager to make observations and things like that, and have little interesting things. Because to me, this film is very good at doing stuff like that, where it can take pages of description and just put it in a single look, or put it in a single, exchange between two people. But what I like about Clarice Starling is how much she grows as a person, because you see her training at the academy. Like, she's very good at the physical stuff, like, climbing ropes and running through the forest and things like that. But when it comes to her actual training, she's very kind of, she knows all the important things to do, but she'll forget little things, like where's your corner eye and things like that. Like when she's doing a training exercise where they're meant to break into a house and arrest someone, she does the thing where she goes, hands up, hands on your head, like, show me your hands, you have the right to remain silent. She's about to do Miranda rights, and then all of a sudden someone comes up behind her and just, cocks the gun, and he just goes, you're dead, Starling, and things like that. And I really do like the fact that that's not only a great bit of, character development, but it's also a great moment of foreshadowing, because it does kind of tie into something that happens at the end of the film, which I'll get into. Big spoilers, by the way, for the film, so if you haven't seen it, please stop this video and go and watch it on Amazon Prime. It's an amazing film. It deserves its Oscar-winning status. It really is amazing. It's got a fabulous cast. It's well written. It's well directed. It's just a really good film. So if you haven't seen it, please click off this video and go watch it on Amazon Prime. I think it goes off in just a few days, so you really have very limited time to watch it. But if you can get it anywhere else, please do. If you can get a DVD of it or something, you really should. It's an amazing film. But this particular scene is interesting to me because I feel like when she gets told to, and again it ties into the fact that when she gets to the hospital, she immediately, as soon as she meets Chilton, she's immediately called out for, well, not called out, but he immediately draws attention to her gender and how, you're very, interesting for an FBI agent and things like that. And he goes, I can tell you are somehow, Hannibal Lecter's type. He really does have a type, and I can definitely see that you are his type. And he's immediately, drawing attention to her gender. He's immediately, bringing out the fact that she's a woman FBI agent that Jack Crawford has brought in. And it's very kind of interesting because Dr. Chilton is an arsehole, pretty much. He's very much, a seeker of fame, a seeker of recognition. He has almost like an obsession with fame and things like that. There's even a moment where he's being interviewed in one of the sequences throughout the film to do with Hannibal and him being imprisoned, where he goes, I can assure you that we know who the killer's name is, and his name's called Lewis Friend, and my name's Dr. Henry Chilton. How do you spell that? Oh, it's Chil, and things like that. He's very much interested in people knowing his name and who he is. And what I really like about that entire sequence is that Clarice Starling kind of just knows what he's like immediately as soon as she sees him. Like, she's very respectful. She's like saying, I appreciate what you're trying to tell me, sir, but I just really need to do my job, and things like that. And she very clearly, is very driven to interview Hannibal. But what's very interesting is that she just knows what type of person he is. She knows that he's kind of like this, throwing these very sexist comments at her and things like that. And it really is quite horrible, but then at the same time, because Clarice Starling has probably done this loads of times, she probably just thinks to herself, oh, it's just old news at this point. Like, I'm used to having men look at me a certain way, like they want to possess me, kind of thing. But it's just a very interesting thing. But what I really like about this film, what it does with details, is very interesting, because there's a sequence in this film. I'm going to be jumping around a lot, so I do apologise if people think, oh, you're jumping around a lot, you should keep it very focused on the plot and everything like that. But what I really like is that there's a scene before she goes down to go and see Hannibal, where Dr. Chilton says there was a woman who once did a sort of like medical check on Hannibal Lecter, and when she leaned over him, he bit her face. He took a bit of her jaw. They tried to readjust her jaw. Took a bit of took a bit of her eye, and his pulse never got above 85, even when he ate her tongue. And what's very interesting is he hands her a photograph, and she looks at it, and you don't see the damage. You don't see the jaw dislocated. You don't see any of the grisly details that they're describing. But you just hear what they say about it. And I think this is what's brilliant about both the Thomas Harris novel, even though I haven't read it, and the Tally screenplay, because the descriptions and everything like that should be in there, where it just kind of shows you, or it tells you what sort of grisly details there are, but he never actually describes it in very grisly detail. He just says it very blatantly and lets your imagination conjure up what's the worst scenario. And that's kind of very interesting, because at the second half of the film, there's a very interesting sequence where Hannibal breaks out of his cage, where you just kind of think to yourself, this is the goriest scene in the entire film. And that's all you can really say about it, is that's the goriest scene in the entire film. The rest of the film is kind of very kind of sterile, and very much feels like, oh, it's relying on descriptions and what characters are describing of certain scenes. But it's really wonderful, and I love the scene where Clarice goes to the underground, and she's like going through all the cells, and she meets Hannibal, and the first thing he says is he's standing upright in the centre of his cell, and he just goes, "Good morning." And it's very interesting, because I think when I can't remember where I saw this documentary from, but it was a behind the scenes documentary on Silence of the Lambs, and I remember it was on YouTube, I think, and they used to do this entire series where they would go behind the scenes of iconic films like Scream, like Fatal Attraction, like Silence of the Lambs, and they would go into detail about it. I think they were about an hour long. I think Bravo produced it, or TMZ, or something like that, or one of those big channels. And Anthony Hopkins said of playing Hannibal Lecter that he basically says he's been portrayed as a madman, but in that very first scene you don't show the madness. You show him as very sophisticated, he's very gentlemanly, he's very kind of accommodating. He says the words "good morning" to Clarice Starling, even though she is an FBI agent. And there's that very beautiful scene where he kind of like says, "Show me your ID," and she shows it to him. He goes, "Closer, please," and she gets closer, and he goes, "Closer," and he looks at it, and then he looks back up at her, and he goes, "That expires in 1 week. You're not real FBI, are you?" And I love that moment, because it's like he knew from the very moment he saw her that she was way out of her element. But what I like about Clarice Starling is she holds her own in that interview. That she really holds her own. She's very kind of confident, like saying, you know, I want to talk to you about this guy called Buffalo Bill. And he goes, he keeps trophies that, he goes, "Do you wonder why they skinned them and why he's called Buffalo Bill?" And she goes, "Oh, it was a bad joke in the press. They used to say, oh, he likes to skin his humps and things like that." But then very quickly, he goes, "Do you know why he skins them?" And he goes, "Oh, some serial killers like to keep trophies of some kind, sort of like a memento of their victims." And he goes, "I never kept mine." And she goes, no, you ate yours." And I love that entire sequence, because even though they're talking about the most grisly stuff, it's done in a very hypnotic way. Like when you see Hannibal Lecter look at Clarice Starling in that shot where he goes, "That expires in 1 week. You're not real FBI, are you?" He does it in a way, it's filmed in such a way where it's almost like Hannibal Lecter is looking right at you, so you feel just as uncomfortable as Clarice Starling probably does in that moment. And she does feel really intimidated, like she's going, "Oh yes, this is, you know, me pretending to be this really strong FBI agent, but in reality I'm completely out of my depth." And I just really love it. It's a really well done sequence, and I love how, as the interviews go on, she's more, you know, assertive. She's, you know, more sure of herself, because at the end of that sequence, there's a moment where a cellmate is doing something inappropriate in his cell, and he flings, for lack of a better word, his after fluid in her face, and she gets very upset, visibly upset, and Hannibal Lecter basically goes, "This is unspeakable. I will not stand for it." And it's very, you know, undignified behaviour, very rude, and he's like saying all this stuff, and he goes, "Oh, listen to me, Clarice, I can give you exactly what you want. Search inside yourself. You know it to be true. Go into this place," and all that stuff. "Look for, you know, Hester Moffat," and he just shouts, "Go now!" And it's very kind of melodramatic, but you can really feel the weight of what's going on. And it's horrible, because part of me feels like the cellmate says something to her much earlier, which is very vulgar, which I'm not going to repeat here. But the fact that that didn't put Hannibal Lecter in a bad mood. It was the fact that he did that very disgusting behaviour to her in that cell moment. It was like, that really just kind of shows you what, you know, Hannibal Lecter is he's this man who is incredibly animalistic in a, you'd think so. You'd think he'd be this very animalistic individual, but in reality, he's very kind of, you know, dignified and very classy, and he doesn't like the fact that, people are, pleasuring themselves in the next cell over and flinging their, after fluid in the visitor's faces kind of thing. It's very kind of rude and very undignified. But what's really horrible is that Clarice Starling is vulnerable in this moment. Like I said, she's a new person at this job. She's new to the FBI thing. She's just completed her training, or is just undergoing her training as the film begins. And you feel her vulnerability at that moment. That when she leaves her cell, she kind of just is immediately broken. She thinks of her father, who was sort of like a police department sheriff, I think he was. And you feel her emotion, you feel that weight, and it's really sad. But then when you see her in the other scenes, she has complete and utter control in those moments. And I love how much Clarice Starling grows as a person throughout the film, because it's like, she starts off as very unsure of herself. She's saying things like sir and things like that. She's very accommodating, very polite. But then very quickly she'll start to, when she meets Hannibal Lecter again, and she's talking about, the deal that she made. Because what happens, there's two storylines going on. There's the interrogation between Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling and Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill is a notorious murderer who likes to skin his victims. He goes after women mostly, and he likes to skin his victims. And he's using this sort of to do a Cruella de Vil. He wants to use their skin to sort of sew together a coat that he can make to sort of feel more comfortable in this new skin that he wants to make for himself. So he literally is someone who wants to transform into something else. And what's very interesting is how they use the chrysalis, how they use the moths and the chrysalis. It's such an interesting idea, because to me, moths and insects are always used in serial killer stories to kind of, show how in common these serial killers are to these life forms, or how much they're misunderstood. Kind of like, Vecna in Stranger Things, where he often sees, he has a fascination with spiders and he has a love of spiders. Because they always feel like he can relate to them, because they are very much misunderstood. But they're often considered, monstrous because of their 8 legs, but they're also creatures that also kill the bugs that bug us as well. So it's very much an interesting duality, I suppose you could say. Whereas in the case of Buffalo Bill, aka Jamie Gunn, he wants to use these moths because he relates to them more. He wants to be like the moth. He wants to transform. He wants to become something else because he hates himself so much. And that's going to be something that I'm going to come back to much later on. But I feel like what's very interesting about this film is he captures a senator's daughter by the name of Kathy Martin, and he keeps her under a well. And what's very interesting is when they have the investigation of another Buffalo Bill victim, there's a moment where Clarice Starling is looking over the details of the corpse, and she's saying things like, her nails are badly chipped. It looks almost like she was trying to claw her way away from something or out of something. And you're thinking to yourself, that's not going to come back again. And just having that image alone is very grisly. Like the idea that she's trying to claw her way out of something so bad that she's damaged her nails. That's really horrible. But then when you see what's happening to Kathy Martin down in that well, and you see that there's during the famous, he puts the lotion on his skin or else it gets the hose again scene, she's looking up at the wall, and you can see like the scrape marks of the nails, and you can see like a little bit of the nail embedded in the rock. It's really horrible, like a little bit of flesh, and it's really horrible. But then at the same time, I found myself going, that's really brilliant visual storytelling, because you've heard that and then you see it and it's like, oh god, that's horrible. But the part of me feels like there are moments where they could have gone a little bit too far, like the fact that like that image alone would feel a little bit excessive to some people, but I think it works because it really kind of taps into the horror of being trapped and the horror of having no control. And that's why I'm going to go on a series of tangents, but that's why I love the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because in that film there's a scene where they're sort of like doing a little bit of a documentary. They're going around the house and they're sort of looking at all the different things there, and then you see like the scratch marks on the walls. And you're wondering, where does that come from? But then there's a scene where Leatherface is taking someone down into the cellar, and they're like grabbing hold of the walls, and they literally like scratch the walls, and there's literally like scratch marks, and you're literally going, oh, that's where it came from. And it's like, oh, it's really horrible. But that's really effective storytelling as well. That's what I really like about it. And I think that's what makes, The 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre is such an underrated gem. I love the original as well, but I found myself going, it adds something new that you wouldn't think about before. And that's what I kind of like about that scene in Silence of the Lambs. But what I really want to talk about as well is that during that scene, her second interview with with Hannibal Lecter, she is starting to talk very formally, like she's talking to him like she's one of the FBI, like one of the head senior officers, and she says, "Oh, we've got you this island, and you have this very nice place where every day, every month, once a month, you get to go out of this cell and you get to go on this beach." And you get to feel the grass beneath your feet. You get to have all the food you want, everything like that. And that's if you give us Kathy Martin and if she survives. If Kathy Martin dies, you get nothing. And she thumps it on the tray thing that she puts between his cell and her. And she literally just slams the door shut. And it's like, she knows what she's doing. She's in complete control in this scene. Like, she knows what Hannibal Lecter is like. She knows what he's able to do. But what I really like is that both Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter know each other so well by this point, and there's that really wonderful scene where he literally says, "Well, how about we do this a certain way, Clarice? How about we do certain things in this particular exchange need certain turns? Quid pro quo." That's a phrase that you'll have to say 5 times faster in order to get the hang of it. Quid pro quo. I tell you things, you tell me things, and if I tell you something about Buffalo Bill, you tell me something about your childhood, about your father. And he's telling him about, Buffalo Bill and how he had, a lover by the name of Raspel who was a patient of his initially, but then he was found murdered, and she asks, "Did you kill him?" And he goes, "No, I didn't." And what's really funny is that, but I don't know who he is, but whoever he was, he definitely was quite an angry fellow or something like that. And I really do like the fact that Hannibal Lecter says to Clarice that he doesn't know what happened to Raspel, but later on, when he is confronting the senator, he says, "Oh, Lewis Friend, Buffalo Bill, his real name, Lewis Friend, him and Raspel used to be lovers," and things like that. He says that, but then it's like, but he said to Clarice that he didn't know, so it really kind of makes you think, all of this is based on trust. He will only tell Clarice as much as he can if she is completely honest with him. And he'll know if she's lying. He even says, "I know if you're lying, Clarice, about your father," and things like that. And I really do love that relationship that he really does. They really do start to understand each other in that moment. And he goes, "Oh, he was a very good cop. He was a family man. He was very dedicated to his job. And he didn't die by a serial killer. He didn't die by a gunman. He died by, chasing down a few robbers who robbed a drugstore." And that moment is just really sad, like hearing her basically recall what happened during that moment. And there's that moment when she goes to view the first body where she sees the funeral, and it really does make you feel sad because she does really look up to her father, and it's really kind of sad just to see her sort of go through this very horrible, nightmarish world. But there's a lot of vulnerability there, and there's a lot of trauma there, and that's what makes, Clarice Starling such a relatable protagonist. It isn't that she's good at everything, it isn't that she, gets everything that she wants. Listen, modern Hollywood. She's vulnerable. She's someone who clearly is out of her element, being with Hannibal Lecter and being with Jack Crawford and being with Buffalo Bill. But at the same time, she's very confident. She's very assertive during that first body interview. She's like turning around to all these men, and she's a very, I don't mean to sound condescending, but she is a very tiny woman in contrast to all these big burly men that surround her. And she like raises her voice and she goes, "Listen up now, gentlemen, you'll listen here now," and things like that. She's very confident, and she's saying, "Your family would like to thank you for bringing this victim to us, and her family very much appreciate what you've done for her, but now you need to realise that we need to take care of her now. Let us take care of her." And it's a really good moment because it shows that she is able to hold her own amongst this entire room of very, very, very experienced sheriff officers and FBI informants and things like that. And I love the moment. This is a really good, badass moment for Clarice, where Jack Crawford's talking to the sheriff, and he says, "Oh, I don't really want to talk about the nature of this case" to the lady in the room and things like that. And then, of course, later on, he turns to Clarice and he goes, that really burned you, didn't it? And he goes, well, I'd like to say I'm sorry, but I had to do what I had to do for the sake of the case. And she goes, well, that doesn't matter, sir. People learn to act off of you, or learn how to behave and act off of you, and you need to, be more, accommodating to your fellow officers. And if you start to, use language like that, people are going to copy you and follow how you do things, and it doesn't, and make it right. And I really do like the fact that Clarice Starling was very honest in that moment and said, look, I did feel hurt. I did feel hurt that you were kind of putting me aside because of my gender and not kind of, trying to show what a gritty world this is, because I can handle it. I'm an FBI agent. There's a reason why I came into this field. So it's a very well written character. It isn't just simply a case of, oh yeah, she has to be good at everything to wave the feminist flag. She needs to be human as well. Human means vulnerability. Human means flaws. So, here endeth the lesson, modern Hollywood. Yeah, I had to give that little dig to modern Hollywood in there. But yes, Clarice Starling is the template. She should be the template because she is a great character. But what's very interesting about this film is that there's a lot of there's a lot of telling and not showing throughout a good portion of the film. And the one moment where it does start to feel very grisly and very graphic is the scene with the nails in the well. But there's only one really horrifically gory scene in the entire film, and that's not even a scene to do with Buffalo Bill. It's to do with Hannibal, like the scene where he finally learns what Clarice Starling's background was like, why she's in the FBI, why she's doing this, and she talks about being in a farm. Her aunt and uncle owned a farm, and one night she went out and she went into the barn and she saw the lambs and what her uncle was doing to the lambs. They were screaming, and she was so horrified by the screams that she basically associated every case that she will ever work on, including the case with Kathy Martin, her trapped by Buffalo Bill, as sort of like a form of redemption for those lambs. And he goes, well, you wake up in the dark and you hear the screaming of the lambs. You want to stop that screaming, don't you, Clarice? And things like that. So it's a very interesting exchange. And what's very interesting is in the behind the scenes documentary that I watched, Jonathan Demme and Ted Talley were originally going to cut that entire sequence, or they were going to cut it down so that you don't see the close-up of Jodie Foster's face and her emotions in that moment. They were originally going to cut to a flashback where it's her childhood, like seeing the lambs and trying to get them out. But Jonathan Demme said, well, Ted Talley said to him, what are we going to do with this scene, this flashback? And Jonathan Demme looked at him and he said, we can't do it. We can't. Jodie Foster is literally giving an Oscar-winning performance there. And if I cut away from that, I'm doing a huge disservice to her as an actress. And it's such a really good moment. But it's really sad as well, because you really do feel her emotion and her pain with why she wants to do this, why she wants to save Kathy Martin. It's such a great moment. And that emotion spills out in the first scene where she's investigating the body. There's a moment where she literally feels like she's almost about to tear up because she's so sad at seeing this woman being degraded and having her skin ripped off and all these other things, and just these very horrific images, and the chrysalis as well. There's so many good moments like that in Jodie Foster's performance where she just shows a lot of vulnerability, and she shows a lot of strength as well. Like the scene where she finally confronts Buffalo Bill is a really great sequence, because we know that they've got him, essentially. They've got his address, they've got his real name. But what's very interesting is that you think that the house that they're in, because Hannibal Lecter during his cage sequence gives a clue to Clarice, where he goes, what does Buffalo Bill do? And he goes, oh, he kills these women, he takes their skins. And he goes, no, he covets. He covets. And we covet what we see every day, don't we? And there's that very wonderful moment where he goes, he kills these women because he hates them, and he goes, no, that is incidental. It's very kind of, it's very over the top, but it's very well done, because you really do know that there is a certain mad genius in Hannibal, even though it still is mad. But it's really wonderful. And I love the line where he says, I can't remember what the word was actually, but there was a moment where he goes, oh, that thing about the island was a nice touch. The name you gave was such a nice touch. And she goes, well, thank you, Doctor. And he goes, yeah, that was good. And I love that moment, like that moment where he's like going, tip my hat off to you, Starling. You did a good job there. That was a great moment. But yes, there's a moment where they're about to capture Buffalo Bill, and you're watching two sequences. You're watching the sequence of him like looking out of the house, and like hearing lots of noise and lots of talk. But then you sort of go into the point where, you see it from the sniper team's perspective, and they're getting all the guns ready, and there's like a delivery man out there, and then you hear the knock at the door. Bill goes to go and answer it, and then he opens the door and it's Clarice Starling, and then the person knocks on the door and it's like someone else, and you think to yourself, oh no, she's in there, and she's in there with him, and it's really horrible. But then you kind of think to yourself, Clarice Starling's got this, because even though she has had that moment where she stumbled, where she didn't look at her corner eye, she improves. Like, she has such great control during that moment that when she gets the gun out and she's like going down into the cellar and she's like going, Kathy Martin, I'm FBI, you're safe. Where is he? Where is Buffalo Bill? Is he gone? Do you know where he is? And Kathy Martin just goes, how the fuck do I know? She's like down in the well. There's little moments of comedy like that in this film, which I really do like, even though it probably wasn't meant to be funny, the way she just delivered it, like, how the fuck do I know? I'm down here in this well. Oh, it's such a great, it's so good. And there's also the moment where she is alone in the dark with him. He's got his, infrared goggles on, or sort of like night vision goggles on. He's about to shoot her, and he's like, reaching out to her, like trying to grab her hair and things like that. But then he sort of like gets the gun out, and she like literally hears it, and she turns around. That moment was so good, I had to rewatch it. That was the moment where I was like, that was such a great moment, because that was such a great moment of character growth for Clarice Starling. But that was such a great moment where you just sort of see her literally learn in that moment that where's your corner eye? Your corner eye is wherever you're not looking. And of course, when you're not looking, when you've got the lights turned off, everything's your corner eye. Everything's sort of like the thing that you have to look over once or twice or even 3 times. And that's such a good moment, because when you see that, there's a wonderful visual moment where she shoots the gun, and she shoots him a couple of times. But then there's like she shoots through like an opening where sunlight comes in, and it's almost like she's letting the evil of Buffalo Bill escape, like the evil that's out there sort of escape into the world, or sort of like escape out, or be let free. Like let free. Maybe you could look at it as almost like Jamie Gumb as a damaged soul who's finally set free after all this time. He's finally become the chrysalis. He's finally transformed into, the thing, the very person, I suppose you could say, that he was supposed to be, which is free and anywhere else. Or you could just see it as, he's dead, and now finally the evil's just, gone or left the world entirely. But Buffalo Bill is just pure evil. What else should I cover? Yes, the cage scene is amazing, and the fact that he chooses lamb chops after he's heard, Clarice Starling's story about the lambs, that was brilliant. I like the fact that there's almost like a homoerotic element with the fact that he bites off that guy's cheek and he like sprays him with mace, and then he starts whacking him with the police baton, and he kind of lets out this very kind of almost orgasmic, cries he's doing it. There's something very kind of, almost erotic about it, except even though there's nothing openly erotic in it at all, it does feel kind of like that there's a lot of elements to that there, and I really do like that aspect. But I like the fact that when he's done this very horrible sequence of just killing this one cop, the other cop's escaped, and he gets a knife, and he goes, ready when you are, Sergeant. And he just walks out of the cage, and I love that moment, because it's like, Hannibal's going to be Hannibal, and it just really kind of feels very Hannibal in many ways, that he would just have one of those one-liners, like, ready when you are, Sergeant, kind of thing. But he isn't just simply going to do like an ordinary, police check. He's going to be, killing him effectively. And that's what I love about Hannibal. Even though, yes, he is still evil, yes, he is still, a cannibal, he is a very likeable individual. It's hard not to like Hannibal, because it's something because Anthony Hopkins did it first. He did it, well, he didn't do it first, but he's one of the more famous portrayals of Hannibal. The first one who ever did it was Brian Cox. In Manhunter, and he did a really good performance as well, but he did a different take on Hannibal, because of course Red Dragon and Manhunter is a completely different story. Silence of the Lambs is completely different, so they're different tonally. But what's very interesting about Hannibal is no matter what portrayal you see, every actor who's ever played Hannibal always brings something new to the table and always brings something interesting to add to the character. Like, say, for example, with Anthony Hopkins' performance, he's very sophisticated and very eloquent. He's interested in fine wine and good dining and art. That's why when he catches the ire of Chilton, as punishment, he takes away his drawings and things like that. So it really goes to show that Hannibal Lecter is constantly thinking about things. And I like the fact that one of the drawings is of the Piazza in Rome, because that's actually a very interesting plot point in the Hannibal film and novel. And I have something to say about the Hannibal novel. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I do like aspects of it. I don't like the entire thing. I didn't like the ending. I'll go into that when I actually tackle Hannibal one day, but I feel like I hated the ending to the original Hannibal novel, because part of me felt like Clarice Starling is such a strong character, and she's such a great character that has a lot of strength, a lot of reserve in just how she conducts herself with her job in the FBI. And the fact that she kind of, just surrenders to being hypnotised by Hannibal, that I felt was a really bad ending. So I prefer the ending to the original film better than the novel, because I feel like the novel really feels like a betrayal of her character. Yes, it might have been very good as a shock ending, but part of me just feels like it was just done for the sake of a shock ending. It didn't add anything. But I think I can assure you that the ending in Silence of the Lambs is much better. After she succeeds in getting the Buffalo Bill case, she gets a phone call from Hannibal Lecter, and he asks her, "Hello, Clarice of the Lambs, stop screaming." And she goes, "Yes." And she goes, "Where are you, Dr. Lecter?" And he goes, "I'm sorry, Clarice, I can't talk long." And he goes, "I'm having an old friend for dinner." And you can see that Chilton's getting off this plane. And I love that, because even though you should be terrified for Chilton, you are also very happy, and you are kind of smiling as well, because you're thinking to yourself, we shouldn't be feeling pleased at the idea of someone eating another person, but we are, because it's Chilton, and of course it's Hannibal. So it's an amazing film. It's a great screenplay. I think it's an amazing piece of work. It has funny moments, but it's not completely 100% a comedy. It is very funny. It's very well performed. The people who made this clearly put a lot of effort into it, and it's just amazing. And especially the character of Hannibal Lecter. But I feel like one of the things that I will talk about before I sign off here, I'm sorry if the video's been quite long, but I feel like this film has gotten a lot of backlash in recent years, because the main villain of the film is a man who likes to cross-dress, and he's a man who is actively meant to be a transsexual man. But in reality, I think, well, part of me feels like I understand, because part of me feels like, because I watched a film called My Friend Dahmer, and when I first watched it, I was very offended, because this was a film about, a real life serial killer who was a gay man who went after other men and basically killed them and ate them. I was offended by that film, because it basically, or I was offended by the idea of Jeffrey Dahmer, because he basically, is this gay man who, killed these other men, and it kind of made me think, oh yeah, this kind of almost demonising gay men because I'm gay, and I feel like that really offended me, because it felt like, but that's because Jeffrey Dahmer is a real person, and My Friend Dahmer is a sort of fictional take on Jeffrey Dahmer as a person. But I found myself going, just because he's a monster, that doesn't take away from the fact that he's a monster. He still is a horrible person, he still did these horrible things. But part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for him, in the fact that he was a man who lived in isolation. He didn't have very good parents, he didn't have a very good home life, but he constantly got given things like, oh, his dad introduced him to taxidermy, and he obviously, was allowed to watch films like, The Exorcist and things like that. And I found myself going, because he's so empty inside, he's willing to, form a connection with anybody because he loves men. He wants to form these very strong connections, but he doesn't want them to leave him. So he feels like killing them is getting back some of that control that he might lose if he was to watch someone walk out the door. So it is very tragic and very sad, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he is a horrible, nasty serial killer. And I feel the same way. I can't speak for the trans community about being offended, but to me I feel like you should look at Buffalo Bill if you're a trans person and say, this is the dark mirror that I don't want to look at. Yes, he is. It is a representation of, how I might be feeling, but it's not something that should define me, and it's not something that should be doing that, because I think it's very important to say that with the trans community, it's important to say that you are not Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill is evil. He's an evil man who hates women. And he doesn't just hate women, he enjoys objectifying them. But he doesn't just hate women, he hates himself. He hates himself so much to the point where he literally can't stand to be in his own body. That's how much he hates himself, because he's been subjected to lots of violence and lots of cruelty, that he literally hates the world. He hates the people that he is interacting with. He hates everything. He hates even women. He hates everything. He hates himself more particularly. That's what he hates, and he feels more of a connection to the chrysalis. That's why the chrysalis is such an important theme in the book and in the film, because you feel that he relates to them because they can transform. They can physically change from one thing to the other. That's why he probably feels such a connection to being a transsexual and wanting to transition and reassign his gender, because he feels like he wants to be a woman. He's fascinated, but he thinks he's a transsexual. He isn't actually a transsexual. He thinks he is, and that's why he wants to transform. That's why he feels such a connection to the chrysalis. But what I'm saying to the trans community is, yes, you can be offended, but you can also look at it as though, oh, this is a cautionary tale. This is something that says, well, I'm not like that. You can look at yourself and say, I'm not like that. I'm not a monster. I don't hate women. I'm not going to skin someone for their suit or whatever. I am me. And say to yourself, trans person, whoever you are, if you are a trans person watching this, say to yourself, look in the mirror, look at yourself up and down, and say to yourself, close your eyes and say, I am me. I am who I am. I am a trans person. I am a proud trans person. And say that you are loved and you are adored by everybody. You are not a monster. You are not Buffalo Bill. You are not, Jamie Gunn. You are not a monster. You're not evil. In the same way that I did whenever I thought about Jeffrey Dahmer. I thought, I'm not him. I am my own person. I'm loved. I'm, treated special. I'm loved by my family and my friends. Like, if you have good family and if you have good friends, tell yourself that. Or whenever you feel like you don't have anybody, talk to someone and say, I don't feel this way, but I do feel like I should be validated and feel loved. That's what you should do. You shouldn't be thinking to yourself, oh, I'm angry at this film that's over 40 years old because it has a negative depiction of a trans person in it. And first of all, Buffalo Bill isn't a trans person. Again, he thinks he's a trans person, but he isn't. Just think to yourself, it's just a movie. And that's what it is. If you can't go through all the mental gymnastics that I've thrown your way, well, not mental gymnastics, but if you don't find the emotional comedy group that I've just said comforting at all, or therapeutic at all, just say to yourself, it's only a movie, and movies can't hurt me. Like, that's what I often think whenever I think about Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was a real person, yes, but part of me feels like whenever gay men are depicted in film, I do get very sad, because whenever I see a horror film, and I know I'm going on a massive tangent, whenever I see a horror film, I always get kind of very worried whenever a gay character is introduced in a horror film, because it's like, I'm always thinking, yay, representation, but then at the same time I'm also thinking, oh my god, how long is it before, this person finally gets axed? And I always get worried and very anxious. That's why I didn't watch Ozark afterwards. Like, when two gay characters died in that, I thought, no, I'm not watching the show anymore. And I know that might sound sad and kind of pathetic, but that's just who I am. I've gotten to the point now where wherever I see gay characters getting killed or gay characters suffering, I do feel very angry and very sad. But that's another topic for another video, I feel like. But that's just who I am. That's just who I am as a person. Like, yes, I can, let it slide with other shows and films, but there comes a time whenever you watch something and you do see something get negatively depicted, where you do kind of find yourself going, okay, I've had enough of seeing all this suffering, I've had enough of seeing all this other stuff. And I just think, I get it, I get where, a lot of the backlash with the trans community with this film comes from, but I feel like letting yourself get angry because it exists, because it's there, doesn't necessarily mean that it's there for a negative purpose. I could be offended by Jeffrey Dahmer. armour and all these other things. I could be offended by the film Cruising, like the Al Pacino film Cruising, but I'm not, because I just think to myself, it's just a film, and films can't hurt me. People can hurt me, and other people on the internet could probably hurt me as well, but I just think to myself, films can't hurt me. Films are just, fictional constructs. Stories are fictional constructs, but they depict real life things. But I think that's the important thing. So if you if you stuck around long enough for that, please take that on board. That if you don't think this film's a positive depiction of anything, I just feel like, well, just tell yourself it's not it's just a film, and films can't hurt you. But I hope I haven't lost a lot of my audience with this, because I did go on a massive tangent, but I feel like that was an important thing to say, and I feel like that's something that I hope addresses the controversy that this film has garnered over the years. But I hope you enjoyed my review for Silence of the Lambs, and I hope you're having a very good day. This has been Josh with Whimsical Industry Musings, or WHIMS, and if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe for more. I hope you're having a very good day. Take care, bye for now.